Sitting comfortably? Seatbelts on? We're off on another adventure in Nutopia. With me, David Brownwell. Who sat on the fig rolls? In this episode, we're going to delve into the nature of ritual. What a ritual is and is not, why ritual is important to all of us, and how we can create our own meaningful ones. We'll explore communal rituals, new and old, from singing with nightingales to Jack in the Green. We'll look at the crossovers between ritual, performance and theatre, and delve into death rituals, touching on my own experiences, having lost my dad during the making of this series. And finally, unlikely as it sounds, we'll conclude by resolving a genuine existential ritual crisis that I've carried for over 10 years, involving the film The Wicker Man. Our guide for this episode is Chris Hughes, head druid of Anglesey, celebrant, death doula, drag queen Maggie Noggy, and someone with a great passion, experience and knowledge of ritual.
So my name's Kristoffer Hughes. I'm the penaeth of Derwydd on Ynys Môn, or the head. It roughly translates as a head. It can also translate as a chief, maybe, of the Anglesey Druid order. Ritual is important to me as a druid because it gives me the space to stop and listen in a way that is profoundly connected to either the celebration that I'm engaged with, or the magical working I'm engaged with, or whatever the function or purpose of that ritual is. So I don't particularly think that ritual has an acute and a direct impact on external society. But to make that statement isn't to say that ritual doesn't have a function, because I think its function is that it alters the internal constitution of that society by affirming and confirming the things that are important to it. You know, so we all know what's happening when we go into a court of law and there's a man in a black gown with a nylon wig on his head, and we know the protocols, we know what to do because it's a ritual. There's the person that's sitting there isn't Mr. Evans, it's Judge whoever. It's a ritualistic component in our society, just like the Queen is, just like the coroner is. And so we have all of these ritualistic components, and then we break those down. And so take Queen Elizabeth, she to some people might represent the sovereignty of the land itself. But we also have sovereignty, and I think rituals can cause us to stop, pause and listen to our own inner sovereignty and bring that out in a way that's transformative. Is getting up in the morning, brushing your teeth, you've switched the kettle on in a particular way and put your mug in a particular position and had all your accoutrements ready to make your morning coffee. Some people might say, well, that's a morning ritual, but I would say that's not a ritual, that's a habitual practice. When something is ordinary, we use it just as a tool. So I think when something is sacred, it's connecting us to something on a cosmic level. So it's connecting us to something that is macro rather than micro, you know? And that is transcendent somehow. And there's so much play on words in druidry of light and radiancy and the beams and the rays of Awen and shining brows. And I often wonder, well, what is that light? What is it? Is it an illumination like from a bulb? And I don't think it is. I think it's a transparency within the druid, the bard, the priest, the witch, the magician, that causes other people to see the transcendent through them. And I think that's what ritual does to you. It causes you to step into a space where you become transparent, and that all of that mystery, mysticism, magic and enchantment then reveals itself through you. And I think that's what ritual does in a way that's different to ceremony or habitual practices. Does that make sense? There's a particular exercise, right, that comes from one of Joseph Campbell's work. And in this exercise, he describes how he was taken to, I think it was a cave system somewhere in South America. And he'd been asked to collect items during the day that represented the 7 things in his life that he cherished the most. And he spent a day looking at these items and symbolically imbuing them with these qualities. And during the evening, he walked into this cave, and at certain points he was stopped, and a guardian would ask him, "Give me that which you treasure the least." And he had to give one of them up, his most treasured things, until he met the last guardian who said, "Give me that which you treasure the most." And he had to give everything away, and he was stripped to nothing. And then when there was nothing there, he found that he was living within the miraculous. That all of the myths, that the hero's journey, all of the things that we love Joseph Campbell for, shone through him, and he became transparent. And that what was there was his center, his world tree. It was ritual that caused him to perceive and assimilate those truths. And I think we all love ritual, whether it's somebody who is if I think of my mother, my mother's idea of spirituality is Shandkid wallpaper at 375 quid a roll, and that's it. But she also kind of loves the rituals that I do as a druid. She doesn't necessarily understand what's going on, but I think it calls to a part of even the most secular of individuals, and they remember something. In the last 4 decades, it's not so much a phenomena in some regions of the world, but in Britain it was a new phenomenon. Have you noticed how it's only in the last 3 decades we've had roadside shrines where accidents have happened?
Yeah.
It's fairly new, it's literally only 30, 40 years. And that tells you that there's a craving in society for ritualized actions, because we've become so secular. We no longer have the priest to go and talk to. We don't have the vicar who comes for scones and Victoria sponge on a Sunday and we can tell him our woes. We don't have that. So we're ritualizing things in a way that gives a succor or consolation or a way to feel a connection to something that we had no power over.
And locks on bridges as well, I've noticed.
As well. But I think that's all an indication that people crave connection, and they crave an emotional connection through ritual. But there's a different quality when you're involved in a communal act that is somehow integrated with not only your culture but your landscape and your heritage. Our summer solstice ritual usually has about 350, 400 people who come to it, of which I would say only 15-20% are actually druids or pagans. The others are just ordinary people from the community, and they love it. They absolutely love it, and they don't necessarily understand what's going on, but they're compelled somehow to want to be there at dawn.
In some ways, this episode charts my own deepening connection with ritual and my participation in it, both secular and spiritual. I attended the blessing of the nets in Brighton.
Now with your blessing, the nets used by the fishermen of this city,
which, while associated with Christianity, doubtless has its roots in our pagan ancestry.
and a successful...
I took part in an occult ritual in Berlin that seemed to be a summoning of Baphomet, a horned pan-like figure often mistaken for the devil.
Known to all as the Baphomet. Baphomet. Baphomet.
That was pretty fruity. I even took part in a ritual with friends and seekers in a northern castle in honour of Eris, goddess of chaos. I could explain what Discordianism is, why we were chanting Podge, Podge, Podge to the tune of Monty Python's Spam song, but that's for another episode. It was during the first lockdown that I found myself connecting on a deeper level with rituals at home and in my local environment. This came in part from joining OBOD, the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, and participating in practices that tuned me in to the changing of the seasons, the sun and the moon, and the elements. I love the eightfold wheel of the pagan year, marking the equinoxes, the summer and winter solstices, and key rituals like Beltane, Imbolc and Halloween. Here's Chris Hughes again.
my husband and I always go a little bit crazy at Halloween, because it's a huge festival for us as druids. And as Welsh people as well, Calan Gaeaf, the Cairns of Winter, is a really important festival. But people scorn it, and there's a lot of disdain and belittling of the kids going around playing trick or treat. But that's a ritual, and it's an important ritual. And it should be encouraged, because that is a really important ritualistic component of our culture. It's teaching us something, tells us something about the time of year and our relationship to it, and the ancestors, and moving into the darkness. And progressively, as I developed and evolved in my own druid practice, those secular celebrations like New Year's Eve and they mean less and less and less to me, because they're not indicative of something that's happening in the natural world. That's just a man-made fabrication, isn't it? Nothing's actually happening. It's just a calendar that's changing. Whereas on the winter solstice, something is actually happening within our solar system. Something is happening to all life in the northern hemisphere that can sense the coming of the sun. Bulbs are responding under the ground to something that is happening millions and millions of miles away, and we think we're unaffected by it. Whereas the snowdrops know it's happening. And the weather to us is just a ghastly grey winter for months on end. And so in Druidry, the year is punctuated into bite-sized pieces that not only offer us an opportunity to celebrate the drama and the cycle of moon and sun, and the turning of the season, and the shifting of the planet on its axis, but it also allows us the opportunity to pause and consider how that affects us internally. So it's not just about celebration, there's also a transformation happening as well, as you connect to that cycle, because it's happening to you and you are happening within it. It's not just something out there, it's not just gathering on the 25th of December in your mother's house or your in-laws' house and just enduring this ceremony of, why are we doing this every year? And because we've become so disconnected from what it's actually about, which is the rebirth of hope and the coming of light, the coming of hope and warmth and joy, and the relief that we might actually survive this. We might get through this winter. And although the construction or the construct of the eightfold wheel of the year, as we call it in paganism and druidry today, is not something that existed in its totality in antiquity, but that doesn't matter. It exists now because we need it to exist. So we know that my Celtic ancestors, they didn't necessarily celebrate the equinoxes. We've got no evidence that they did. And we know from some of the mythologies that they did celebrate May Day, Calan Mai, Beltane, and Calan Gaeaf, Halloween, Samhain. We know that they mentioned those things, so they must have been important to them. But to us, we have 8, and what I love about that is it sings the connection back. It causes you to stop and take notice. So the fact that we do have this wheel of the year is very appropriate to modern paganism, because it does strive to cause us to find a way to reconnect. So I love all of them. I have a different relationship with all of them, but they say so much about me. With every year, with every passing year, I learn so much about myself because of the wheel of the year. It's not
Can you give a few examples? In what way?
Well, I think so. If you take the dark part of the year and that sense of maturation that happens from early September through to the beginning of November, and I used to have a very frivolous relationship with that part of the year, because I would just look forward to Halloween and to the frivolity of it. That's a difficult word for a Welsh person to say. And but now, as I'm maturing, I can see myself reflected in the wheel of the year. And you know, as you get closer to your own dark half of the cycle, I can appreciate what that means in a way that I couldn't comprehend at all 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It's causing me to look at my life in a different way, at its maturation, and what do I do with that maturation, and how do I now face the inevitability of the darkening of my life and the end of my life. And I find that, you know, the opposite end of the year, the fertility and the blossoming and all of that sexuality and expression of sexuality is maybe not so much a part of my life anymore, you know. And so I find that I connect to that in a very different way. It's how can I express the powers of sexuality and fertility through my inspiration, whereas before it was just all about fucking. And the celebration of that, the celebration of sexuality and that rising of the sap, you know, and all of that red raw blood coursing through the earth and through its people. But now it's changed. The focus is changing as I'm changing, and so I look at that, I journal with that, I play with all of those themes within my own living as I traverse the wheel of the year. I'm thinking, well, what's it teaching me about me now in 2022? How does it teach me? What does it say about how I dealt with a pandemic? How did I deal with loss? How do I deal with the new life that I'm making for myself? So even though you might think the wheel of the year is repetitive and it's just happening, it isn't repetitive. It's not repetitive to us. It's not repetitive to a tree. A tree is having a completely different experience of the summer solstice this year as it did last year, because it's grown. You know, it's developing and growing into itself, and so are we.
I love the way Chris connected the passing of the seasons with his own sense of aging and the psychological changes that come with that. Wanting to connect communally with the eightfold wheel of the year, I journeyed to a secret location in Sussex on the day known as Beltane or May Day, and joined folk singer Sam Lee and musician Cassandra Balba round the campfire for song, story, and to listen to the nightingales sing at the dead of night and learn why the May Day ritual was so important to our ancestors.
We rejoiced and we celebrated the returning of the life, and we acknowledged the members of our community that hadn't made it through those hard winters. It was as those times that we created ceremonies and customs that marked the coming in of the spring, coming in of summer. Here we are on possibly the most ancient and the most once celebrated marker in the calendar as the beginning of new life. And we honoured them in merriment and rituals, maypoles. We danced around and had copious amounts of sex underneath. That's what they were there for. Long before the Victorians put ribbons on them and danced little girls in circles around them. But once upon a time, maypoles existed in every village, and they're a place of great libation and orgiastic behaviour. And the May Day would be celebrated, it is tomorrow, will be celebrated in many villages and towns with kind of iconic and slightly iconoclastic obioses and May garlands and crowning of May kings and queens. And this Beltane period is deeply ancient and deeply important. And the reason why I mention it is because as we are in this state of heady joy, we are spending these nights as we are now outside listening to nightingales sing. They would have sung us through these blissful weeks. I sat myself down to view all around, and the song of the nightingale, why he echoes all around. His notes were so charming, his voice so sincere. No music nor song.
Sam has been running his Singing with Nightingales events for many years now. They've become a new ritual. Stories and songs by the campfire, listening to birdsong, food, laughter, and then single file, we all walked through pitch black for half an hour to where the nightingales were singing. We lay down on the dewy grass. Sam played the shruti box and did overtone singing, and Cassandra played Greek bagpipes and recorder. Not the most obvious choice of instruments for duetting with a nightingale, but it worked really well. I couldn't recall the last time my eyes had been so accustomed to the dark, free from light pollution and screens. The fire, the singing, the darkness, lost in a wood at midnight, it made for an enchanting ritual, simple yet profound. I love that for centuries these birds have been seen as harbingers of love, birds associated with the joys of spring, the blissful end of the cold of winter, a return of warmth, something we take for granted or have done ever since the days of central heating. The following day, I participated in Jack in the Green in Hastings, a May Day ritual revived over 40 years ago, and like many of our communal rituals, open to interpretation and shrouded in myth and supposition.
Hello, my name's Heather Leach and we are here at Hastings Traditional Jack in the Green, which is currently, this is the 40th version of the revival, which was revived in 1983, and the reason why it takes place in Hastings is because in the mid-19th century we used to have Jack in the Greens on the streets in Hastings, and they died out in maybe up to the 1950s, and so we have the revival, which is, as you can hear, going strong.
What should I expect to see? What's going to happen to Jack later today?
Oh, well, he's king for a day. He presides over the procession. He leads the procession. He goes on his stage over there at the top of the hill and presides over the afternoon's activities. And then at the end of the day, he's brought to the stage and he is slain, but in a good way, because we have the blessings of the summer as we throw out the leaves from the jack, and everybody takes a leaf for good luck in the summer, and we all keep it through the summer, and then we burn it on our bonfire in October.
So down below there are crowds and crowds of people, most of whom are dressed in green with green foliage-like headwear and costumes. There are people dressed as giant mushrooms. There's a kind of angry Quaker-looking woman statue about 20 feet high holding a broom. She's one of the chimney sweeps. And another two characters that kind of look like from the Muppets or Fraggle Rock. I'm not sure what they're about. There's a group dressed entirely in yellow. There are Morris dancers. There's drumming. There's dancing taking place. There's accordion music. And it's about 9:30 in the morning, and people are already pretty drunk. So Jack is asleep inside the Fisherman's Museum, and a chap inevitably dressed in green with a staff is encouraging the gathered crowd to wake Jack in the Green.
Yeah, I'm Keith Leach. I'm chairman of the trustees these days. It all goes terribly legal of the Jack in the Green charity. Jack in the Green is difficult to describe. It's a large conical structure covered in leaves, and a man gets inside and dances, and then the bogies are they're the attendants. They're the people that look after it and just keep it safe.
And why is it important that tradition like this is continued, kept alive?
I think they're absolutely essential, because if people can connect with their own roots through their own culture, I think that makes them more respectful of other cultures, and it means that they're more likely to be respectful of others and less likely to be afraid of foreigners, because they're rooted and know who they are.
And the Green Man symbol was originally found on churches, is that correct or not?
Yes. There are many theories as to why. One of the ones that's sort of a contemporary theory is that actually it represents the story of Seth. And you've also got the idea of death and resurrection. You've got the death, and then you've got the resurrection coming through the greenery.
My name's Barry Jones, and born in Hastings, and been chimney sweeping in Hastings for 30 years. May Day was a very special day for people throughout history, because May Day isn't the first day of summer, it's not the first day of spring, it's the start of the warmer, brighter days, which was celebrated in ancient times. Chimney sweeps became involved in the 18th century. Celebration of May Day entailed a procession around the town, and the chimney sweeps would go out with their families as it was the end of their working season. So they were looking to celebrate, went out with their families, dressed up in all the gaiety they could find, ribbons, and they'd celebrate with a garland, and they'd take a garland round with them, as I do with my family, which basically is an 8-foot pole with a bell-shaped garland of flowers and greenery. Now that garland got bigger and bigger until eventually Jack, the man, had to get in the green to carry it, hence Jack in the Green. So the whole history of Jack in the Green is about celebrating May Day with a garland. But today's Jack in the Green is an 8-foot bush, heavily fitted out with lots of greenery with a crown of flowers, which echoed the original garlands, but has evolved into what is viewed by a lot of people today as a pagan thing. But the term Green Man only came into use in the 1930s. Before that, it didn't exist. So the whole thing has got to be viewed by most people as the Green Man, the spirit of the woods, the spirit of summer. Which is fine, because these things evolve, traditions evolve.
And why is it important to continue this?
You'll see on the day there's so much joy, basically. The whole town comes out. We have crowds of up to about 15,000 people lining the streets, and about 10 to 12,000 people on the hill where we finished the procession. And finally, really, the whole ethos of Hastings is dressing up. People in Hastings love dressing up, and there's an excuse.
During the making of this podcast, my father died. He was 89 and had been in physical and mental decline for some years. It was my first experience of losing a close family member and a difficult time for all of us. In some ways, the saddest part for me was Dad's final few weeks in a nursing home. The staff were lovely, but the whole process felt so impersonal, mechanised and soulless. His room was undecorated, curtains closed to the greenery outside, his bodily functions taken care of, but what of his existential, spiritual or emotional needs?
It's so apparent in death, dying and bereavement, how we've become so disconnected from the things that make us human, and even today the Diagnostic Service Manual of the American Psychiatric Association decided that the parameters for the human experience of grief needed to be changed, and that the acceptable duration of time that somebody should be in sufferance of grief was 14 days, and after 14 days you could medicate them because they're ill. They're not ill, they're grieving a loss. And it seems as if at every turn, and I see it so much in medicine, having worked in medicine for so long, that when we break, we're not fixing the break, we're masking it with something and not addressing what's actually happening. So rather than addressing the fact that Mrs. Jones is bereaved because she's lost her husband of 50 years, or Mr. Evans down the road who is bereft because he's lost his cat, rather than just addressing you are experiencing something vital within the human condition and we should be here to support your experience of it. It's like, take this pill, oh, don't talk about it, just go back to work because your productivity is going to decline because of the state that you're in. And we've become those people. And I saw that so much in the death service profession. And you can see that pattern happening in every other aspect of society. It's this almost this fear that if we're not in control, what the fuck is going to happen? And in that control, we compartmentalize everything, and everything becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And now we're all about shutting our borders and locking people out. And you think, shouldn't we have gone the other way? There's nothing wrong with having a syringe driver and turning your face to the wall because you're in pain and dying in a haze. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But to have given it over entirely to medicine and made it the domain of medicine, which are not capable of dealing with it because their job is not to deal with existential issues. And when that person is lying on their deathbed, their only concern is, except for their pain, is existentialism. And a doctor, that's not their job to do that. Our doulas have gone. Mrs. Green, who lived at the bottom of Water Street, she's gone. She's dead. We've forgotten her wisdom. And that kind of tells you that's symptomatic of a disconnect. If you look at any single society around the world, you can learn so much about them by observing the rituals that they participate in on a daily basis. So again, it sounds like a broken record, but if you look at the way in which people treat their dead, you will learn an awful lot about those societies. So I was talking to a druid today from the United States who's of Indian ancestry, and he had to go over to India. His grandmother had died, and I think he went to the city of Varanasi, and he set her on fire. He set the pyre alight, and he'd never done that. And there was this profound experience happened to him that was deeply ritualistic, but so intimately connected to the visceral element of what was happening. And we've completely lost that. But those rituals are really important for integrating people into the mechanisms that society has in place to deal with the things that happen to it. So I work as a celebrant now, so my only direct association with death service profession is as a celebrant, which I've done for like 20 years, but I didn't have an awful lot of time to do celebrancy, but now I do more and more of them. And of course a funeral is a ritual. It's the ritual of sending a stark and frank message to the bereaved that the dead are now leaving us and they're entering the realm of the ancestors. Even the word funeral comes from the Indo-European root erfum, which means to vanish or to disappear. So something is leaving, something is departing. And the consequence of that is emotional relocation. So the purpose of that ritual is to emotionally relocate the person as being deceased and as an ancestor, which is why when in settings where a body is never found, the grief can never be reconciled because the ritual is lacking something. So what I found during the pandemic was the biggest damage to society was our rituals were disrupted. We no longer had access to ritual. And I think a lot of people discovered the true meaning of ritual because suddenly they weren't allowed to have them. People who'd never stopped to think about the importance of ritual.
The funeral service for Dad went well. I wrote and read some words for him, but I also wanted to honour his memory my own way. I asked Chris how he'd recommend going about creating my own meaningful rituals.
I think the important thing is to recognise that ritual punctuates your lived experience with something that is sacred, and it brings the sacred into a moment. So I think find the things that bring you joy, and if you can see the sacred or discover the sacred within that joyousness, you're on the right path to creating a ritual that can transform you further. And perhaps that's just acknowledging the sun rising or the sun setting or moments in a day that feel liminal or different to other times of the day. If you're able to find the tools to ritualize those moments, it will draw the sacred to it because it's already called to you. So you need to go and meet it in the middle somewhere and create that bridge. And the bridge is ritual. And we know how to do that. Yeah. It's already programmed into us. We're extensions of the same power that gave rise to the universe. You know, we are the eyes through which the universe experiences itself. It's not as if we have to learn that stuff. It's just there. We have to just acknowledge that something is sacred, and it will tell us what to do in that moment.
The day is warm, a good day to work in the margins and the borders, and we'll plant new spring bulbs and shower in soft numbers, enchanting digits that cascade from the sky, dizzying the heart, sharpening the mind. The day is young. If there are geese in the garden, we'll shoo them away. Not every sailor has a taste for the rum. It's hard work, I know, but where else would you be? And if you keel over in the soil, let the earth carry us. Thanks to Chris and others around me who'd been through bereavement, I was inspired to write poetry, to make a short film from old Super 8 of Mum and Dad on Bridlington Beach in 1962, and I returned to the old house we lived in till I was 7 on the outskirts of Scunthorpe. Opposite the house were the woodlands I'd played in and we'd walked in together. And there I found a tree, now his tree, and I conducted a ritual. I buried totems of love and made another to pin to the tree. Hardest and perhaps most necessary was visiting his body in the funeral parlour and saying goodbye. I chose my parting words with care. I told him I loved him and left, knowing that that would be the last time I'd ever see him. Or so I thought. Minutes later, my sister decided that she wanted to see him, but didn't want to do it alone. Back I went, with the slightly embarrassed feeling you get when you hug and kiss everyone at a party, say your big farewells, and then minutes later realise you've left your hat and you have to go back. I think he'd have found it funny. But all of these rituals made a huge difference in processing my grief. For many years I've been performing Sing Along a Wicker Man with my friend Eliza. I live in Brighton, how else am I going to make a living? And if you've never seen the film, it was released in 1973 and is the story of an uptight Christian copper, Sergeant Howie, lured to a remote Scottish island in search of a missing girl, only to discover that the islanders there have reverted back to paganism. Thus begins a cat and mouse game. As Howie begins to suspect the islanders of human sacrifice, spoiler alert, it is not the missing girl who is barbecued at the end in a giant Wicker Man, but poor wee Sergeant Howie. The Wicker Man is seen by many as the pinnacle of folk horror. It's pretty camp in places and stars the likes of Britt Ekland and Christopher Lee. It's also peppered with haunting folk music, both original and traditional, sung throughout the film by the heathen islanders. As a sing-along, the Wicker Man was asking for it. During the show, Eliza and I hand out goodie bags with edible foreskins and umbilical cords, and we lead the audience with the singing and actions. It's clear from the start that we're all identifying with the pagan islanders. Our audiences come masked and dressed as them. We all sing and perform with them. It's all good fun, until at the end, we collude in the ritual sacrifice of an innocent man. Eliza and I have performed Sing Along a Wicker Man over 100 times. Conducting the show itself is a ritual, but the ritual within it, the sacrifice, leaves me feeling, well, troubled. A ritual is meant to be a sacred act after all. I needed some kind of resolution. I began by asking if Chris saw any similarity between ritual and theatre.
I think it's important to acknowledge that there is a similarity, because there is an element of performance. It's also something that causes a web of connection between every single individual that's attending it, and that everybody is a part of that ritual and should be a part of that ritual. And the pageantry is really important. So one of the sites that we use is Bryn Cellydd. It has a 3/4 of a mile path from the main car park to get to the ancient monument. And we process, when we process silently. There's some drums, but it's almost an exercise in mindfulness. It's a preparation for what is about to happen. And there's a point where we cross a river. So at the bridge, we stop and we give offerings to the river and to the tutelary goddess of that river. I find that pageantry important because it sets the scene and it sets the intention. So that when you arrive at this incredible monument that's perfectly aligned to the solstice sunrise, you're already prepared. There's been these subliminal messages that you're stepping from the ordinary into the extraordinary.
In 2022, we performed Sing Along a Wicker Man to a June gathering of druids in Glastonbury town. They loved it, dressed up, sang lustily, and clearly identified with the islanders. This warm, peaceful, and nature-loving order didn't seem to bear the guilt that I felt at the end of every show. Was I missing something? Well, guess who was present in the audience that night?
Ever since the first day that we did that show, I wrestled with what do we do at that point at the end? What do we do? And we have actively all colluded in this. We're
murdering him.
We're murdering him.
I was thinking about it the other night because I didn't meet you during the Sing Along a Wicker Man. And I was looking around the room and at all of the joyous faces. There's so many people in modern paganism just fucking love that film, and I think the reason we love it is because it's the epitome of ritual, and it's always the ritual that we long for, apart from the burning of the copper bit. But you know what I mean? It's like that entire community is so immersed in ritual activity, and that at the centre of that community is ritual and the importance of ritual, and everything circumambulates around that fact, and I think a part of us is constantly trying to recreate that, even in our paganism, and then we see something like the Wicker Man. It's like, yeah, that's what we long for. That's what we want. That's what we need. Apart from burning the copper, there's a living myth that happens at that point. That mythology, because I always think that Howie's qualities are, just like you've described, kind of unlikable, but yet he still has a perception of what is sacred. And it's completely in opposition to what they consider to be sacred. But then right at the very end, it's as if he, in that moment of beseeching his God, he acknowledges that he himself is being made sacred, which is what the meaning of sacrifice is, the making of something sacred. And I always feel slightly sorry for him, but at the same time, I kind of think, yeah, he represents more than just a Christian copper being burnt, but it's all of this stuff within ourselves that we don't necessarily like. But I just love that there's all of this ritual in it that we crave and long for. I love it. You wouldn't believe how many times I've got to Halloween and looked at one of my deceased patients and thought, well, this person missed a hand. You know? Anyone know? Just so I can recreate a moment with the Wicker Man.
I love Chris's insight that a big part of our attraction to the Wicker Man film is how immersed in ritual the islanders' lives are. In ritual, sometimes we burn the things that we need to let go of, and in order to welcome in something new. I saw that in Jack in the Green, and in the story of the druid who returned to India to light his grandmother's pyre, and perhaps too I can see that in poor Sergeant Howie. So I'm going to try from now on to see Howie as a mythic representation of an outdated way of relating to the world, one that is too sober, uptight, prudish, overly moralising and out of touch with nature. And finally, I'm reminded of a definition of ritual from the author Joseph Campbell mentioned by Chris at the beginning, writing, "A ritual is a reenactment of a myth." The new rituals I created for my dad revolved around the personal myths of our lives together. Sam Lee has created new rituals through his singing with nightingales and others involving turtle doves and salmon, while Jack in the Green and the eightfold wheel of the pagan calendar connect us with something more universal, myths that mark the changing of the seasons and the passing of our lives. In a world that still treats nature as something separate to us, ritual has the power to re-enchant and reconnect us with each other, the living world, and the mysteries beyond. Right, time to crack open the fig rolls. Adventures in Nutopia was produced and presented by me, David Bramwell, with music from Oddfellows Casino. For more info, go to drbramwell.com or contact me on Twitter @drbramwell. Huge thanks to all of my guests in this episode and for the support of Hawkwood College. The idea of Nutopia was established by John and Yoko in 1973 as a place with no boundaries and whose international anthem is silence. Gratitude and support to our friends at Journey to Nutopia for their role in our provenance. This podcast is made possible by the generous sponsorship of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. Wait, Druids you say? Aren't they all just about wearing white robes, hanging around Stonehenge and listening to the Levellers? No. Isn't there human sacrifice? No, that was propaganda put about by Julius Caesar. But you have to have a beard and carry a staff, right? No. Are they passionate environmentalists with a love of storytelling and art, herbalism, divination, and with an added spiritual dimension and ritual practices that connect with the seasons, the elements, and nature? Yeah. That's what druids are. Do they drink mead? Actually, yeah, they do drink quite a lot of mead. Find out more about what the Order does and offers on their website at druidry.org. If you've enjoyed Adventures in Nutopia, please leave a review for us, tell your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to find out about future episodes.